She stood before the bench with her chin raised and her hands steady, but when the words poured out in Portuguese, then Mandarin, then Arabic, the entire courtroom fell silent, and one man in the back realized his heart had just stopped beating. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're ready to witness a love story that began with 7 languages and a moment that changed everything, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, what's the bravest thing you've ever done for love? Because tomorrow I'm bringing you another story that will leave you believing in the power of unexpected connections. Today's story proves that sometimes the most extraordinary love begins with the courage to be truly seen. Now let us begin. The fluorescent lights in the courthouse bathroom hummed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows under Naomi Jefferson's eyes as she stared at her reflection. 26 years old, law degree from Columbia, fluent in 7 languages, and still her stomach churned like she was 12 again, standing in front of another social worker who'd already decided she wasn't worth the paperwork. She smoothed her navy blazer, the one she'd bought with her first paycheck from the legal aid clinic. Professional, respectable, unthreatening. The armor she wore into battle every day, except today the stakes were higher than usual. Today wasn't about helping someone else navigate the system that had chewed her up and spit her out a dozen times. Today was about proving she deserved to stay in the country she'd called home for 15 years. The immigration hearing was scheduled for 9:30, Judge Morrison presiding, a man whose reputation preceded him like storm clouds. Fair but formidable, they said. No nonsense. No patience for sob stories or excuses. Naomi didn't plan on giving him either. She checked her watch. 9:15. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate Kendra. You got this, genius. Show them what a real American looks like. If only it were that simple. The bathroom door squeaked as another woman entered, elderly, clutching a manila folder like a life preserver. Naomi recognized the look, the same mix of hope and terror she'd seen in every waiting room, every government office, every place where someone else held your future in their hands. First time? Naomi asked gently. The woman nodded, eyes wide. Citizenship test. I study so hard, but my English. She shook her head. ¿De dónde eres? Naomi asked, switching to Spanish. The woman's face lit up. Guatemala. ¿Tú hablas español? Sí, y muchos otros idiomas. Naomi smiled. You're going to do wonderful. Just breathe and remember why you're here. She left the woman practicing her English phrases, squaring her shoulders as she walked toward courtroom 3B. The hallway buzzed with the quiet chaos of the legal system in motion. Lawyers huddling with clients, families whispering prayers in languages she recognized, and some she didn't, clerks shuffling papers with practiced efficiency. This was her world now, had been for 3 years since she'd graduated and thrown herself into immigration law. Every case felt personal because every case was personal. Every victory was proof that the system could work, that people like her, like them, deserved to be here. But today she wasn't the lawyer. Today she was just another immigrant, hoping for mercy. 3 floors up, Christopher Wells adjusted his tie and settled behind his court reporter station, fingers poised over the stenotype machine that had become an extension of himself. 15 years of capturing other people's words, 15 years of being invisible in plain sight, the human recording device that judges and lawyers forgot was even there. It suited him fine. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant no one expected anything more than technical precision and professional courtesy. No one asked about the empty apartment he went home to, or why a 34-year-old man spent his weekends learning obscure board games instead of dating, or what had happened to the woman whose picture he'd finally thrown away 2 years ago. Judge Morrison entered with his usual brisk efficiency, robes billowing. Morning, Chris. Immigration calendar today. Yes, Your Honor. 23 cases scheduled. Morrison nodded, settling behind the bench. Let's keep it moving. These folks have been waiting long enough. Christopher had worked Morrison's courtroom for 8 years, respected the man's fairness even when his efficiency could feel brutal. Immigration cases were always hard. Lives hanging in the balance. Families torn apart by paperwork and policies. Hope and heartbreak measured in statute numbers and precedent citations. The first few cases moved quickly. Routine renewals, status adjustments, the usual dance of bureaucracy. Christopher's fingers flew across the keys, capturing every word, every objection, every plea. Then her name was called Naomi Jefferson. She walked to the petitioner's table with perfect posture, her movements controlled but graceful. Christopher had seen thousands of people enter this courtroom, but something made him look up from his machine, made him actually see her instead of just recording her presence. Maybe it was the way she held herself, dignified without being defiant, confident without being arrogant. Maybe it was how she placed her hands flat on the table, fingers steady despite what had to be crushing anxiety. Or maybe it was simply that in a room full of people trying to make themselves smaller, she refused to shrink. Miss Jefferson, Judge Morrison consulted his papers. I see you're here regarding your adjustment of status application. There seems to be some question about the documentation supporting your claim of extraordinary ability. Yes, Your Honor. Her voice was clear, professional, with just a hint of something Christopher couldn't quite identify. An accent that wasn't quite an accent, the subtle musical quality that came from speaking multiple languages. The government's position, the prosecutor continued, shuffling through his files, is that Miss Jefferson's qualifications, while impressive, don't meet the statutory requirements for— Your Honor, Naomi interrupted gently. If I may address the court directly? Morrison raised an eyebrow. You're representing yourself, Miss Jefferson. I am, Your Honor. Christopher found himself leaning forward slightly, fingers still moving, but his attention completely captured. Something was about to happen. He could feel it in the way she straightened her shoulders, the way she took a breath that seemed to draw strength from somewhere deep inside. This was the moment everything would change. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying the young woman before him. Miss Jefferson, the court appreciates your desire to represent yourself, but I must advise you that immigration law is complex. Are you certain you don't want counsel? I'm certain, Your Honor. I've been studying law for most of my adult life, and I understand the requirements for extraordinary ability classification better than most. The prosecutor, a thin man named Garrett, who Christopher had seen demolish countless petitioners with bureaucratic precision, stood up. Your Honor, with all due respect to Miss Jefferson, the documentation she's provided simply doesn't meet the statutory threshold. She claims expertise in linguistics, but her evidence is primarily academic transcripts and a few letters of recommendation from professors. There's no proof of the kind of sustained national or international recognition that the law requires. Christopher watched Naomi's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Her hands remained flat on the table, but he caught the slight movement of her thumb against her index finger, a tiny tell that she was fighting to stay composed. Furthermore, Garrett continued, warming to his argument, Miss Jefferson's claim to speak multiple languages is largely unverified. Anyone can claim linguistic ability. The court requires concrete evidence of achievement that sets her apart from others in her field. The silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with possibility. Judge Morrison looked down at Naomi with something that might have been sympathy. Miss Jefferson, Mr. Garrett raises valid concerns. The standard for extraordinary ability is intentionally high. Can you provide additional evidence to support your petition? Naomi stood slowly. When she spoke, her voice carried a new quality, not louder but somehow more present, filling the space in a way that made everyone lean forward. Your Honor, Mr. Garrett is correct that anyone can claim to speak multiple languages, but not everyone can do this. She turned slightly toward the courtroom gallery, where a mix of other petitioners, family members, and court personnel waited. Her gaze swept across the diverse faces, and when she began to speak again, everything changed. Para la señora de Guatemala que conocía en el baño, she began in flawless Spanish, her accent shifting perfectly to match the regional dialect. Usted perteneces aquí tanto como cualquier persona nacida en este suelo. Christopher's fingers hesitated over his keys. The Spanish flowed like music, but he caught the meaning. For the Guatemalan woman I met in the bathroom. You belong here as much as anyone born on this soil. But she wasn't done. Pour ceux qui pensent que l'intelligence se mesure uniquement par le lieu de naissance, the French emerged with Parisian precision, cultured and confident. Vous vous trompez profondément. For those who think intelligence is measured only by place of birth, you are profoundly mistaken. The courtroom had gone completely still. Judge Morrison's pen stopped moving. Garrett's mouth hung slightly open. Für diejenigen die Glauben des Wert der Herkunft bestimmt wird, German rolled off her tongue with academic precision, each consonant crisp and clear. Erlauben Sie mir Ihnen das Gegenteil zu beweisen. For those who believe worth is determined by origin, allow me to prove you wrong. Christopher felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. He was supposed to be recording this, but he found himself entranced, forgetting his professional distance entirely. Du yunesha genwe chunjo bishus that tudding difon huada rinkudarin. Mandarin flowed next, tonal and precise, her voice adapting to the musical quality of the language.
真正的能力超越地理界限。
For those who think achievement must be recognized in specific places, true ability transcends geographical boundaries. She paused, letting the impact settle, then continued in what Christopher recognized as Arabic. Lo ulayaka ladina yata kadun and the tamayas yumkin kiyaso bimayir dayaka. Dawania waldaher likamin insania osamin kawaninikum. For those who believe excellence can be measured by narrow standards, let me show you that humanity is broader than your laws. The Portuguese came next, lilting and warm, para aqueles que acreditam que documentos definam a pessoa. Vocês ainda não conheceram alguém que transformou cada obstáculo em uma ponte. For those who believe documents define a person, you haven't yet met someone who transformed every obstacle into a bridge. Finally, she switched to Italian, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. E per coloro che pensano che il talento straordinario debba essere dimostrato, eccovi la vostra prova. And for those who think extraordinary talent must be proven, here is your proof. The silence that followed was absolute. Christopher realized he'd been holding his breath. Judge Morrison blinked several times, as if trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Miss Jefferson, that was remarkable. But I'm not sure our court interpreter can verify. Your Honor, Naomi said quietly, switching back to English. I wasn't just displaying linguistic ability, I was demonstrating applied linguistics in real time, code switching, regional dialect adaptation, cultural context integration, and simultaneous interpretation of complex legal and social concepts across 7 distinct language families. This isn't just speaking languages, this is what extraordinary ability in linguistics actually looks like. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. These are certifications from the United Nations for conference interpretation in all 7 languages. Letters from the State Department requesting my services for diplomatic functions, documentation of my work with the International Red Cross providing linguistic support in crisis zones, and affidavits from linguistics professors at Harvard, Stanford, and Columbia, attesting to published research that has been cited over 200 times in peer-reviewed journals. Garrett sat down heavily, his objection forgotten. Judge Morrison accepted the folder, but his eyes never left Naomi's face. Miss Jefferson, in 30 years on this bench, I have never witnessed anything quite like that. Christopher found himself smiling, actually smiling for the first time in months. Something about watching her transform the entire energy of the room, seeing her refuse to be diminished, witnessing her turn what should have been a moment of vulnerability into a display of absolute mastery, it awakened something in him he'd thought was permanently dormant. As she sat back down, her eyes briefly met his across the courtroom. The look lasted maybe 2 seconds, but in that moment Christopher Wells realized his carefully ordered world had just shifted on its axis. What language would you want to learn if you could master it instantly? Tell us in the comments. The gavel came down with finality. Petition granted. Miss Jefferson, congratulations on your adjustment of status. You are now a lawful permanent resident of the United States. Naomi nodded crisply, professional to the end. Thank you, Your Honor. But Christopher caught the slight tremor in her voice, the way her hands shook as she gathered her papers. Victory, yes. But at what cost? She'd laid herself bare in front of a room full of strangers, turned her most private strength into public spectacle. The weight of all those eyes on her, the vulnerability of being truly seen, it was written in the rigid set of her shoulders as she packed her briefcase. As the courtroom began to empty, Christopher found himself moving slower than usual, taking extra time to pack his equipment. He told himself it was routine maintenance, nothing more. Definitely not an excuse to watch her navigate the small crowd of people who'd witnessed her linguistic tour de force. The elderly Guatemalan woman from the bathroom approached Naomi with tears in her eyes, speaking rapid Spanish. Naomi responded gently, but Christopher noticed how she kept glancing toward the exit, her body language screaming flight even as she smiled and accepted congratulations. Quite a show, wasn't it? Christopher looked up to find Judge Morrison gathering his own files. Sir? Miss Jefferson. In 30 years I've seen a lot of extraordinary people. But that, Morrison shook his head, that was something else. Made me remember why I got into law in the first place. Yes, sir, it was impressive. The word felt inadequate, like calling the ocean wet. Christopher had witnessed something that transcended impressive, something that had reached into his chest and rearranged his understanding of what human capability could look like. But admitting that would mean admitting the effect it had on him. And he wasn't ready for that conversation, not with Morrison, not with anyone. Especially not with himself. You've been doing this job for what, 8 years now? Morrison asked, studying Christopher with the same attention he'd given complex legal briefs. Yes, Your Honor. Ever think about doing something else? You're smart, Chris, observant. You see things other people miss. Christopher's laugh came out more hollow than he'd intended. I like what I do. Consistent hours, good benefits, no surprises. No surprises, Morrison repeated. Right. Well, might want to prepare yourself. Word is going to get out about what happened here today. Media loves a good story, and a brilliant young woman schooling the immigration system in 7 languages? That's front-page material. The thought hit Christopher like cold water. Of course there would be attention. Reporters, interviews, probably social media buzz. Naomi Jefferson was about to become very public property, at least for a few news cycles. Which meant she'd be impossible to avoid, even if he wanted to. Which he definitely did. Want to avoid her, that is. Didn't he? Naomi made it exactly 3 blocks before her composure cracked. She ducked into a Starbucks, ordered a coffee she didn't want, and claimed a corner table where she could finally let her hands shake without an audience. The adrenaline crash hit like a freight train. 15 minutes ago she'd been speaking 7 languages in federal court, and now she could barely remember how to use a coffee stirrer. Her phone buzzed constantly. Kendra, her old law professors, colleagues from the legal aid clinic, everyone wanted to celebrate, to hear the details, to bask in the reflected glory of her victory. She turned the phone face down and stared at her untouched latte. Victory. Right. She'd won. Proved her worth, secured her future in the country she'd fought so hard to call home. So why did she feel so exposed, so raw, like she'd peeled back layers of skin she'd spent years growing? Because that's exactly what she'd done. For 15 years she'd perfected the art of being impressive without being threatening, brilliant without being intimidating, accomplished without taking up too much space. She'd learned to modulate her intelligence like turning down a radio, present enough to be respected, quiet enough to be comfortable. Today she'd turned the volume all the way up, and everyone had heard, including the court reporter with the kind eyes who'd been watching her like she was something precious and breakable and magnificent all at once. Don't go there, she told herself firmly. Don't read into professional courtesy and human curiosity. But she could still feel the weight of his gaze, the way something had shifted in his posture when she'd started speaking, like he was seeing her, really seeing her for the first time. So what if he was? You don't even know his name. Her reflection stared back at her from the coffee shop window. Navy blazer slightly wrinkled now, hair escaping the careful knot she'd twisted it into that morning. Lipstick worn off from the nervous habit of biting her bottom lip. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd just fought the battle of her life and wasn't sure if winning made her brave or foolish. The door chimed and her pulse stuttered as a familiar figure entered. Tall, lean, wearing the same understated gray suit she'd noticed in the courtroom. The court reporter moved with quiet efficiency to the counter, ordered something simple, black coffee probably, and turned to scan for seating. Their eyes met across the crowded cafe. Naomi felt her breath catch. Up close, without the formal distance of the courtroom, she could see details she'd missed before, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious expression implied, the way he carried himself like someone who was comfortable being overlooked, the slight hesitation in his step when he recognized her. He was going to come over. She could see the decision forming, watched him weigh professional boundaries against human impulse. She grabbed her purse and stood abruptly, leaving her full coffee cup on the table. Whatever conversation was about to happen, she wasn't ready. Couldn't handle another moment of being seen, analyzed, understood. Not today. Christopher watched her flee through the window, her purposeful stride carrying her quickly down the sidewalk and out of sight. He stood there holding his coffee, feeling like he'd just let something important slip through his fingers. Good, he told himself. Better this way. Safer. But safe had never felt quite so much like losing. Christopher thought he'd successfully avoided the Naomi Jefferson situation until his phone rang at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days after the hearing. Christopher Wells, this is Janet Rodriguez from Channel 7 News. I understand you were the court reporter for an immigration hearing last week. That's been getting some attention online. He sat up in bed, instantly awake. I'm sorry, what attention? You haven't seen? Someone recorded Miss Jefferson's multilingual response on their phone. The video has over 2 million views on social media. We'd like to interview you about what you witnessed. Christopher's stomach dropped. I can't comment on court proceedings without proper authorization. Of course. Actually, that's why I'm calling. We've received permission from Judge Morrison's office to request the official transcript. Apparently, there's some question about the accuracy of the recording, and your stenographic record would be the definitive version. Shit. I'll need to check with the court administration. Already handled. You should have received an email this morning requesting expedited transcript preparation for media release. Judge Morrison specifically requested that you handle it personally, given your familiarity with the case. Christopher fumbled for his laptop and there it was, an official request from Morrison's clerk marked urgent. He was to prepare the complete transcript of the Jefferson hearing and coordinate with the petitioner to ensure accuracy of any non-English testimony. Coordinate with the petitioner, which meant he'd have to contact Naomi Jefferson, who had literally run away from him 3 days ago. Mr. Wells, are you there? Yes, When do you need this? Today, if possible. The story runs tonight. Naomi had been successfully ignoring the internet for 67 hours when her phone rang at 8:15 a.m. Unknown number, which usually meant spam, but something made her answer. Miss Jefferson, this is Christopher Wells. I'm the court reporter from your hearing last week. Her breath caught. The voice was exactly as she remembered, measured, professional, but with an undertone of warmth that did complicated things to her pulse. Mr. Wells, she fought to keep her voice neutral. How can I help you? I'm calling about the transcript of your hearing. Apparently there's been some media interest and I need to verify the accuracy of your multilingual testimony for the official record. Media interest. The phrase hit her like a physical blow. She'd been deliberately avoiding news, social media, even her email for the past 3 days, creating a careful bubble of normalcy around her small apartment and her work at the legal aid clinic. What kind of media interest? She asked, though part of her already knew. Someone recorded part of your hearing. The video has gone viral. Several news outlets want to run stories, but they need the official transcript to ensure accuracy. Naomi sank onto her couch, closing her eyes. Of course someone had been recording. She'd been so focused on Judge Morrison and the prosecutor, she hadn't thought to scan the gallery for phones. Miss Jefferson, are you there? I'm here, I need a moment to process this. I understand this is unexpected, but legally the transcript is a matter of public record, and with the media attention it's going to come out regardless. At least this way we can ensure it's accurate. The word created an unwelcome warmth in her chest. When do you need this completed? Today, unfortunately. Channel 7 wants to run the story tonight, and Judge Morrison specifically requested that we handle the verification process personally. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. I know this is a lot, but I've been doing this for 15 years, Miss Jefferson. I'll make sure your words are represented exactly as you spoke them. Something in his tone, respectful, protective even, made her decision. Where do you want to meet? There's a conference room at the courthouse we can use, or if you'd prefer somewhere more private. Actually, she heard herself saying, I live in DuPont Circle. There's a quiet cafe called Kramer Books. Do you know it? I can find it. What time works for you? 10 o'clock? I'll see you then. After she hung up, Naomi sat staring at her phone, wondering if she'd just made a huge mistake or the smartest decision of her life. Kramer Books occupied that perfect sweet spot between coffeehouse and bookstore, the kind of place where conversations could happen without being overheard. Christopher arrived 5 minutes early, claiming a corner table with his laptop and the audio recording equipment he'd need to play back portions of the hearing. When Naomi walked in at exactly 10 o'clock, he felt that same jolt of recognition he'd experienced in the courtroom. Today she wore jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out the golden flecks in her brown eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that severe knot. She looked younger, more approachable, but no less striking. Mr. Wells, she slid into the chair across from him, extending her hand. Thank you for handling this personally. Christopher, please. Her handshake was firm, brief, but he caught the slight callus on her index finger, probably from extensive writing. And it's my job, though I have to admit this is the first time I've had to verify testimony in 7 languages. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. First time for me too, actually. Usually I try to keep my linguistic abilities under wraps. Why? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Too personal for their professional interaction. But she didn't seem offended, just thoughtful. Because people react strangely to intelligence in women, especially women who look like me. It makes them uncomfortable, or they turn it into a parlor trick, or they assume I'm showing off. She paused. Or they decide I'm too much work. Christopher found himself leaning forward. Anyone who thinks intelligence is too much work isn't worth your time. Their eyes met, and for a moment the careful professional distance collapsed entirely. He saw something flicker across her face. Surprise maybe, or recognition. Then she cleared her throat and opened her notebook. Should we start with the Spanish portion? But as they bent their heads over the transcript, Christopher couldn't shake the feeling that they'd already started something much more important. What's the most languages you've ever heard someone speak fluently? Share your stories below in the comments section. 3 hours into transcript verification, they'd made it through the Spanish, French, and German portions. Christopher's audio equipment sat between them like a bridge, playing back snippets of Naomi's courtroom performance while she provided literal translations, cultural context, and pronunciation guides. The German section, she said, scrolling through her notes. I used the formal register specifically because Judge Morrison represents institutional authority. In casual conversation, I would have used du instead of sie, but the courtroom demanded, "Where did you learn German?" The question interrupted her mid-sentence. Christopher looked up from his laptop, genuine curiosity replacing professional courtesy. "Sorry," he added quickly. "I don't mean to pry, it's just the way you spoke it was so precise. Academic, but not textbook academic, like you'd lived with it." Naomi set down her pen, considering they'd been working together for hours now, falling into an easy rhythm that felt more like collaboration than obligation. She caught herself watching the way his fingers moved across the keyboard, noticed how he listened to each audio segment twice, once for accuracy, once for nuance. "I learned it from my foster father," she said finally. "Hans Muller. He was a linguistics professor at Georgetown, originally from Munich." Christopher's hands stilled on the keyboard. "Foster father?" "I was 15 when I was placed with Hans and his wife Margaret. Difficult age for placement. Most families want babies or younger kids. I'd been in the system for 8 years by then, bounced between homes and group facilities." She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "Hans was different. On my first day he handed me a German-English dictionary and said, 'If you're going to live in this house, you're going to expand your mind.' That's quite a welcome." I thought he was crazy. I barely spoke proper English. I mean, I was smart, but I'd never had anyone push me academically. Most of my previous placements were more concerned with compliance than intellectual growth. A soft smile crossed her face. Hans didn't care about compliance. He cared about potential. Christopher found himself leaning back in his chair, laptop forgotten. "How long were you with them?" 3 years, until I aged out of the system." The smile faded slightly. "Hans taught me that language was power. Every new language I learned was a door that couldn't be closed to me, a conversation that couldn't exclude me, a culture that couldn't remain foreign. By the time I left for college, I spoke 5 languages fluently." "And the other 2? "Mandarin in college. I had a Chinese roommate who was homesick, Arabic in law school from a Syrian classmate whose family had fled Damascus." Naomi's voice grew quiet. "I learned Arabic because she needed someone to practice with for her asylum hearing. She was brilliant, neurosurgery resident before the war, but her English faltered when she was nervous. I sat with her for weeks, helping her find the words to explain why she deserved safety." "Did she get asylum?" "Yes. She's finishing her residency at Johns Hopkins now." Naomi's eyes brightened with pride. "She sends me a card every year on the anniversary of her hearing." Christopher felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of kindness that went deeper than professional obligation. "That's why you do immigration law. Every case is someone's entire life. Their future, their family, their freedom." She met his eyes. "I know what it feels like to have strangers decide if you're worthy of staying somewhere. Foster care is different from immigration court, but the powerlessness, the having to prove you deserve basic human dignity, it's the same." The silence that followed felt comfortable rather than awkward. Christopher found himself studying her face, seeing past the composed exterior to something vulnerable and fierce underneath. "What about you?" Naomi asked. 15 years of court reporting, that's a lot of other people's stories. Do you ever want to tell your own?" The question hit closer to home than she could have known. Christopher's fingers found the edge of his laptop tracing patterns on the metal surface. "Not much to tell, really. Steady job, quiet life." "Christopher," his name and her voice carried gentle challenge. "You've been listening to my story for the past hour. I'm not asking for your resume." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it. "I used to be married, Sarah. We met in college, married right after graduation. She was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, ambitious, sure of herself." He paused. "She died 4 years ago. Car accident on I-95, coming home from a business trip." Naomi's breath caught. "Christopher, I'm so sorry." "The thing is," he continued, not looking at her, "we were getting divorced, had been separated for 6 months. She was coming home to sign the papers, actually. We'd grown apart, wanted different things. I wanted simple, stable, predictable. She wanted adventure, travel, experiences. His laugh was hollow. She said I was afraid of really living. And you think she was right? I know she was right. Finally, he looked up, meeting Naomi's eyes. After the funeral, after all the paperwork and legal details were settled, I realized I'd built my entire life around avoiding risk. The court reporter job, the routine, the emotional distance, it was all designed to keep me safe from feeling too much. But safe from what, exactly? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Christopher found himself staring at this woman who'd just laid her own vulnerability bare, who'd shown him what courage looked like in a courtroom, and was now showing him what it looked like across a cafe table. Safe from this, he said quietly, from sitting across from someone who makes me want to be braver than I am. The admission surprised them both. Naomi felt her pulse quicken, recognizing the weight of what he'd just shared. Christopher, we should finish the transcript, he said quickly, returning to his laptop with sudden intensity. The deadline, but the damage was done. The careful professional distance they'd maintained was crumbling, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more real. Neither of them was prepared for what came next. What's the bravest thing someone has ever said to you? Share in the comments below. The transcript sat forgotten between them for the next 20 minutes. Christopher had started to close his laptop 3 times, but each time Naomi would ask another question about his work, his thoughts on the cases he'd witnessed, his take on the immigration system, and he'd find himself answering with more honesty than he'd shown anyone in years. You know what strikes me about your job, Naomi said, leaning back in her chair with her 4th cup of coffee. You see people at their most vulnerable moments, when everything they care about is on the line. That has to change you. Most days I try not to think about it too much, Christopher admitted. Easier to focus on the technical aspects, proper spelling, accurate punctuation, clean formatting. But today was different. It wasn't a question. Christopher met her eyes, recognizing that she'd seen through his professional detachment completely. Today I watched someone refuse to be diminished, he said quietly. That's not something you can reduce to technical accuracy. Naomi felt warmth spread through her chest. Is that what you saw? I saw someone who could have played it safe, who could have stuck to English and hoped for the best. Instead, you turned that courtroom into your classroom. You didn't just prove your case, you educated everyone present about what extraordinary actually looks like. She ducked her head, unused to praise that felt this specific, this scene. I was terrified the entire time. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Christopher said. It's being terrified and doing the extraordinary thing anyway. Their eyes held for a moment longer than strictly appropriate. Naomi was the first to look away, but not before Christopher caught the slight flush in her cheeks. So she said, clearly changing the subject, if we're going to finish this transcript, I should probably teach you proper pronunciation for the verification audio. You want to teach me 7 languages in one afternoon? Just enough to not embarrass yourself when you present this to the media. Her smile was teasing, the first genuinely relaxed expression he'd seen from her. Unless you're afraid of a challenge? Christopher found himself grinning back. Try me. What followed was the most enjoyable hour Christopher had experienced in years. Naomi guided him through basic pronunciation in each language, her patience endless as he stumbled over tonal variations in Mandarin and trilled R's in Spanish. She moved her chair closer to demonstrate mouth positions, her hand occasionally brushing his arm to guide his gestures. No, she laughed as he attempted Arabic. You're thinking about it too much. Feel where your tongue sits, here like this. She touched her own throat to demonstrate the sound placement, then reached toward his before catching herself hand-freezing midair. The moment stretched between them, charged with awareness. Christopher felt his breath catch at her nearness, at the way her eyes had widened with realization of what she'd almost done. Sorry, she said, pulling back. I get carried away when I'm teaching. Don't apologize. His voice came out rougher than intended. I like watching you get carried away. The admission hung in the air, honest and vulnerable. Naomi studied his face, seeing past the careful composure to something deeper. You know what I was thinking in that courtroom, she said suddenly. What? That I was completely alone up there. Not just physically, but existentially. Like I was the only person in the world who understood what I was trying to prove. She paused. But when I looked up and saw you watching, really watching, not just recording, I felt less alone. Like someone was bearing witness to who I actually am, not just what I was performing. Christopher felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Naomi, I know it's crazy, we don't even know each other, But sitting here with you working on this together, she gestured at the scattered papers, the audio equipment, the evidence of their afternoon collaboration. This feels more real than anything I've experienced in months. It's not crazy. Christopher's voice was soft, certain. I've been going through the motions for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely interested in another person. Not just attracted, though I am, but fascinated. By the way your mind works, by your compassion, by your courage. Naomi's breath caught. Christopher, I know this complicates everything. Professional boundaries, the media attention, the fact that we met in a courtroom. He ran a hand through his hair. But I can't pretend this is just about transcript verification anymore. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What if I told you I'd been thinking about you for 3 days? That I ran from that coffee shop because I was scared of how much I wanted to have this exact conversation. I'd say I've been thinking about you too, and that maybe we're both brave enough to see where this goes. Naomi reached across the table, her fingers finding his. The contact was electric, simple but profound, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. I don't do complicated, she said. My life has been messy enough. I usually choose safe, predictable, controllable. And I've spent 4 years building walls to avoid exactly this kind of connection. Christopher turned his hand palm up, letting her fingers settle against his. But maybe safe isn't what either of us needs anymore. She smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. Maybe not. They sat like that for several minutes, hands connected across the cafe table, sharing something that felt precious and fragile and full of possibility. The transcript deadline seemed less urgent, the media attention less threatening, the complications less insurmountable. We should probably finish the verification, Naomi said eventually, though she made no move to pull her hand away. Probably. Christopher's thumb traced across her knuckles. Though I have to say, this is the best work assignment I've ever had. Just wait until you hear my Italian pronunciation guide, she teased. You might change your mind. But as they reluctantly returned to work, both of them knew something irreversible had shifted. The careful distance was gone, replaced by the terrifying and exhilarating prospect of something real. Neither of them noticed the man with the camera phone at the corner table or the notification that appeared on social media 20 minutes later. What's the most meaningful conversation you've ever had with a stranger? Tell us about that moment of unexpected connection in the comments. Naomi's phone started buzzing at 6:47 p.m., just as she was reviewing the final transcript pages Christopher had emailed her. She glanced at the screen, Kendra calling. Hey, what's up? Girl, please tell me you've seen the internet in the last hour. Something cold settled in Naomi's stomach. What are you talking about? Check Channel 7's website now. Naomi's laptop was already open. She navigated to the news site with growing dread. And there it was, the lead story with a headline that made her blood freeze. Viral linguistic stars secret romance, exclusive photos show intimate cafe meeting. Below the headline were 3 photos, her and Christopher bent over the transcript, his hand covering hers across the table, and most damaging, a shot of them laughing together, looking for all the world like 2 people on a romantic date rather than conducting professional business. Oh God, Naomi whispered. It gets worse, Kendra said gently. Read the article. Naomi's eyes scanned the text, each sentence landing like a physical blow. Sources close to the story suggest that Miss Jefferson's courtroom performance may have been coordinated in advance with court personnel. Questions arise about the authenticity of what many viewers assumed was a spontaneous display of linguistic talent. The cozy relationship between Jefferson and court reporter Christopher Wells raises concerns about potential bias in the official transcript. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Is this why you really won your case? Then another, fake news. You planned this whole thing. And another, sleeping your way to citizenship? Typical. Naomi's hands shook as she set the phone aside. In the span of 24 hours, she'd gone from inspiring viral sensation to scandal subject. Everything she'd worked for, every professional relationship she'd built, every client who might have trusted her, all of it was being poisoned by the suggestion that her achievement was somehow manufactured, that her integrity was compromised. Her phone rang. Christopher. Naomi, I just saw. Did you know? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Did I know what? That someone was taking pictures. That this would happen. That meeting with me would turn into a media story. Of course not. I had no idea anyone was. Really? Because this is awfully convenient for Channel 7. They get their exclusive transcript verification and a juicy side story about the viral star's secret romance. The silence on the other end stretched too long. When Christopher finally spoke, his voice was strained. You think I set this up? I don't know what to think. Naomi paced her small apartment, adrenaline and anger making it impossible to sit still. You called me this morning saying the media needed transcript verification. Suddenly we're having this intimate afternoon together. And now there are photos suggesting our professional relationship is something else entirely. Naomi, listen to me. No, you listen. Her voice was rising, years of protecting herself against exactly this kind of exposure flooding back. Do you have any idea what this does to me professionally? I'm an immigration lawyer. My clients are already vulnerable, already subject to scrutiny about their credibility. Now they're going to wonder if their lawyer is the kind of person who compromises professional boundaries, who might be more interested in media attention than their cases. That's not fair. Fair? Naomi laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? I spent my whole life building credibility, being twice as good, twice as prepared, twice as professional as anyone else, because I knew I'd be judged more harshly. And now all of that is being undermined because I was stupid enough to think. She stopped herself before finishing the sentence. Think what? Christopher's voice was quiet. Nothing. Forget it. No, say it. Think what, Naomi? Think that someone might actually see me for who I am instead of what I could do for them. The words burst out, raw and painful. Think that maybe for once I could let my guard down without it being used against me. Another long silence. When Christopher spoke again, his voice was different, distant, formal. I need to tell you something. Judge Morrison specifically requested that I handle the transcript verification personally. He said he thought you deserved someone who would treat your words with proper respect. So I should have told you that. Should have mentioned that this wasn't just random assignment, that there was already attention on this case, that meeting with you might create exactly this kind of speculation. Naomi felt the floor drop out from under her. You knew this might happen. I knew there was media interest. I didn't know someone would photograph us or twist it into. But you knew, and you didn't tell me. Her voice was deadly quiet now. You let me think this was just routine transcript verification. You let me think the afternoon we spent together was real. It was real. Naomi, what happened between us was completely separate from, was it, or was I just another good story? The vulnerable immigrant who fell for the sympathetic court reporter. Very compelling human interest angle. That's not God, Naomi. How can you think that? Because I don't know you. The admission tore out of her. I don't know you, Christopher. We had one afternoon, and I let myself believe, I let myself think. Think what? That someone could care about you without wanting something? That someone could see your brilliance and your strength and your kindness and just want to be near it? The tenderness in his voice almost broke her resolve. Almost. I can't do this, she said finally. I can't be the story that follows your story. I won't be someone's scandal. Naomi, please. We can figure this out. Issue a statement, clarify the timeline, show that the transcript verification was legitimate. No, her voice was steady now. Decision made. I spent 15 years learning how to protect myself. I forgot that lesson for exactly 6 hours, and look what happened. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning. Keep my professional life professional and my personal life private. She hung up before he could respond, then turned off her phone entirely. But as she sat in her dark apartment surrounded by the wreckage of what could have been, Naomi couldn't shake the memory of Christopher's voice asking if she really thought someone could see her brilliance and just want to be near it. The worst part was that for 6 hours she had believed exactly that. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and taking a chance on love? Share your thoughts below. Christopher sat in his apartment at 2:17 a.m., surrounded by the detritus of a day that had gone catastrophically wrong. His laptop displayed the Channel 7 article for the 15th time, the photos burning themselves deeper into his memory with each viewing. The comments section had devolved into the usual internet toxicity, but scattered among the vitriol were questions that cut deeper. If this was legit, why meet in a cafe instead of the courthouse? Convenient, how the court reporter just happened to be the one to verify her story. Something doesn't smell right about this whole thing. He'd tried calling Naomi 4 times. Her phone went straight to voicemail, her professional voice politely requesting that callers leave a message. He'd started to speak twice, then hung up. What could he possibly say that would fix this? I should have told her about Morrison's specific request. Should have suggested meeting at the courthouse. Should have been more careful. But even as the rational part of his mind cataloged his mistakes, Christopher knew the real issue went deeper. Naomi hadn't just been angry about the photos, or the media speculation, she'd been terrified. He'd seen it in her eyes, the look of someone who'd been betrayed before, who'd learned that vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. And instead of fighting for her, instead of proving that her trust hadn't been misplaced, he'd let her walk away. Just like Sarah said, afraid of really living, Christopher stood abruptly, pacing to his kitchen window. The city stretched out below him, thousands of lights representing thousands of lives, thousands of people who were probably braver than he was on a daily basis. What would it look like to be brave now? His phone buzzed. A text from Judge Morrison saw the news. "Sorry about the mess. For what it's worth, I've known you for 8 years. Your integrity is beyond question. Don't let the bastards get you down." Morrison's faith should have been comforting. Instead, it crystallized something Christopher had been avoiding. This wasn't about his reputation or professional standing. This was about the fact that somewhere across the city, Naomi Jefferson was probably sitting alone, convinced that her instinct to trust him had been another in a long line of mistakes. And he was letting her believe it. Naomi hadn't slept either. She'd spent the night alternating between fury and heartbreak, between righteous anger and the devastating suspicion that she might have just destroyed the best thing to happen to her in years. At 3:45 a.m., she finally gave up on sleep and made coffee, settling at her kitchen table with her laptop. The responsible thing would be to start damage control, draft a statement clarifying the timeline, contact the legal aid clinic to discuss potential impact on her cases, maybe reach out to a crisis management specialist. Instead, she found herself scrolling through Christopher's social media. It wasn't stalking, she told herself. It was research, due diligence, trying to understand whether her instincts about him had been completely wrong. His Facebook was sparse, mostly professional updates, and the occasional article about court reporting technology. But buried in his photos from 2 years ago, she found something that made her breath catch, a picture of him at what looked like a charity event, wearing a volunteer t-shirt for an organization that provided translation services for refugees. The caption read, "Amazing day helping new Americans navigate their first citizenship interviews. Reminded me why language access is a civil rights issue." She clicked through to find more photos from volunteer events, posts sharing articles about immigration policy, a fundraising page he'd created for a local organization that helped unaccompanied minors. This wasn't the social media presence of someone who viewed immigrants as content for compelling stories. This was someone who genuinely cared. Her phone sat silent on the table, still turned off from the night before. She'd received 17 missed calls from reporters, 43 text messages from friends and colleagues, and according to Kendra's voicemail, over 200 notifications on her dormant social media accounts. But no word from Christopher since their call ended. Maybe he'd realized she was right. Maybe the complications weren't worth it. Maybe he'd decided that someone who would question his motives so quickly, who would shut down so completely at the first sign of difficulty, wasn't worth fighting for. The thought should have been validating. Instead, it felt like another loss in a life that had already included too many. At 7:23 a.m., Christopher made his decision. He drove to the courthouse early, spending an hour in the records department pulling every case file where he'd worked with immigrant petitioners over the past 5 years. The stack grew to over 300 cases: asylum seekers, visa applicants, people fighting deportation, families trying to reunite. Then he drove to Kramer Books. The morning crowd was different from the afternoon regulars, commuters grabbing quick coffee, students claiming tables for study sessions, the early shift of people who used caffeine as a survival strategy. Christopher ordered 2 coffees, one black for himself, one with cream and sugar, the way he'd noticed Naomi preparing hers yesterday, and claimed the same corner table where they'd worked on the transcript, where for a few hours he'd felt more like himself than he had in years. He pulled out his laptop and began typing. Statement from Christopher Wells, certified court reporter. The recent media coverage regarding my professional interaction with Miss Naomi Jefferson has included speculation that I find deeply troubling. I want to be absolutely clear about the facts. 1. I have served as court reporter for over 300 immigration cases in my 15-year career. My commitment to accuracy and impartiality has never been questioned. 2. The transcript verification meeting with Miss Jefferson was conducted at the specific request of Judge Morrison to ensure media accuracy of her multilingual testimony. 3. Any suggestion that Miss Jefferson's extraordinary performance in court was anything other than authentic is not only wrong, but an insult to her genuine brilliance in preparation. 4. The photos published by Channel 7 show 2 professionals working diligently to ensure accuracy in a matter of significant public interest. But beyond the professional facts, I want to say something personal. In 8 years of working Judge Morrison's courtroom, I have never witnessed anything as remarkable as what Naomi Jefferson did that day. Not just the linguistic ability, though that was extraordinary, but the grace, the dignity, and the courage to reveal herself completely in a moment when everything was at stake. Anyone lucky enough to witness that deserves our respect, not our suspicion. Christopher read through the statement twice, then saved it without sending. The words were true, but they weren't enough. A public statement wouldn't reach the person who needed to hear them most. He closed the laptop and pulled out a piece of paper instead. Naomi, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know something. Yesterday was the most real I've felt in 4 years. Not because of the media attention or the professional complexity, but because for 6 hours I got to watch you work, got to see how your mind operates, got to witness the kindness you extend to everyone around you. You asked if I set this up, if I knew there would be photos, if this was all just another story to me. The answer is no. I had no idea someone was watching us, no plan beyond wanting to do good work with someone I was already fascinated by. But here's what I should have told you. Judge Morrison didn't assign me to this case randomly. He chose me specifically because he knew I would treat your words with respect. He said you deserved someone who would understand the importance of getting it right. I should have told you that from the beginning. I should have been more careful about protecting your privacy. I should have anticipated that two people having an authentic connection in public might become public property. I should have fought harder when you pulled away. I'm not asking you to forgive my mistakes or to ignore the complications this has created. I'm asking you to remember that for 6 hours yesterday, we were real with each other, and that kind of connection doesn't happen by accident or by design. It happens because two people choose to be brave enough to see and be seen. I'm choosing to be brave now. I'm choosing to fight for something that felt like it could change everything. If you're willing to be brave too, I'll be at Kramer Books every morning at 8 a.m. until you tell me to stop. Christopher. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it under the door of the legal aid clinic where Naomi worked. Now came the hardest part, waiting to see if courage was contagious. Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and fighting for something that scared you? What did you choose? Tell us in the comments. Naomi found the letter when she arrived at the legal aid clinic at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before her first appointment. She'd been hoping to avoid colleagues and their well-meaning questions about the media coverage, but the folded paper under the door stopped her cold. Her name was written across the front in careful handwriting. She stood in the empty hallway for a full minute before unfolding it, her heart hammering as she read Christopher's words. By the time she reached the end, I'll be at Kramer Books every morning at 8 a.m. until you tell me to stop. Tears were blurring her vision. Choosing to be brave. The phrase echoed in her mind as she sat at her desk, staring at case files she couldn't focus on. All her life she'd been brave about the wrong things. Brave enough to survive foster care. Brave enough to put herself through law school. Brave enough to stand in a courtroom and speak 7 languages to prove her worth. But when it came to letting someone see her heart, to trusting that someone might choose her not for what she could do but for who she was, that terrified her more than any judge or legal challenge ever had. Her phone, turned back on for the first time in 18 hours, buzzed with the notification. An email from Hans Mueller, her foster father, with the subject line, "Saw the news, proud of you." Naomi, Margaret and I watched the video of your court hearing. We've never been more proud, not just of your linguistic skills, though they were magnificent, but of your courage to be fully yourself in a moment that mattered. The media coverage is unfortunate, but remember what I taught you: other people's small-mindedness is not a reflection of your worth. You have spent your life becoming an extraordinary woman. Don't let fear convince you to make yourself smaller now. Love always, Hans. P.S. Margaret says if this Christopher fellow was smart enough to recognize your worth after one afternoon, he might be worth keeping around. At 7:45 a.m., Naomi stood outside Kramer Books, watching through the window as Christopher sat at their corner table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, laptop closed beside him. He looked tired, uncertain, but he was there, waiting. The bell chimed as she pushed through the door. He looked up immediately, hope and wariness warring in his expression. "Hi," she said, approaching the table slowly. "Hi." He half stood, then sat back down, clearly unsure of the protocol for this moment. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't." Naomi pulled out the chair across from him, the same seat she'd occupied 2 days ago when the world had felt full of possibility. "I read your letter. And I realized something. All my life I've been afraid of the wrong things." She met his eyes. "I've been afraid of being too much, too smart, Too complicated. I've been afraid that if someone really knew me, they'd decide I wasn't worth the effort. Christopher leaned forward. Naomi. But I haven't been afraid of the right things. Like what happens when you're so busy protecting yourself that you miss the chance to be loved by someone who sees your complexity as a gift, not a burden. The words hung between them, fragile and brave. I owe you an apology, she continued. Not for being hurt or scared, those were legitimate reactions, but for not giving you the chance to prove that my trust wasn't misplaced. You don't owe me anything, Christopher said softly. I should have been more careful with something so precious. We both should have been more careful, but maybe, she took a shaky breath, maybe careful isn't what this needs to be. Christopher reached across the table, palm up, waiting. Naomi looked at his offered hand for a long moment, then placed her fingers against his. I've been thinking about what you said, she told him, about courage being terrified and doing the extraordinary thing anyway. What about it? I think falling in love might be the most extraordinary thing I've ever done. The words slipped out before she could stop them, honest and vulnerable, and completely terrifying. Christopher's breath caught. Are you, he asked quietly, falling in love? Instead of answering in English, Naomi smiled and began to speak. Sí, me estoy enamorando de ti, she said in Spanish, her voice soft but certain. Oui, je tombe amoureuse de toi, she continued in French. Ja, ik verliebe mich in dich, she whispered in German. Christopher's eyes widened as he recognized the echo of that first day, but this time the languages weren't about proving her worth to a courtroom, they were about offering her heart in every way she knew how. Suda, wa isanyila, she said in Mandarin. Nam, ana akai fi habak, she continued in Arabic. Sim estou me apaixonando por você, she said in Portuguese. Finally in Italian, si me estou enamorando de te. And then switching back to English, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Christopher, I'm falling in love with you, in every language I know and probably in some I haven't learned yet. Christopher stood up, never letting go of her hand, and walked around the table to kneel beside her chair. Te amo también, he said carefully, his pronunciation imperfect but sincere, in the only language I know well enough to mean it. She laughed, tears spilling over. Your Spanish needs work. Then teach me. He cupped her face with his free hand. Teach me all of them. Teach me how to say I love you in 7 languages so I can spend the rest of my life proving it in ways that matter. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. Later, much later, as they sat sharing coffee and planning their public statement about the timeline of their relationship, Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the update video you posted. You two are beautiful together. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Another notification, couple goals, love wins. And another, this is the love story we all needed to see. Christopher looked up from his laptop where he'd been drafting their joint statement. Ready to face the world together? Naomi reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. In any language necessary. What's your favorite way to say I love you, with words, actions, or something else entirely? Share your love language in the comments below.
What did you think of Naomi and Christopher's journey from strangers to soulmates? This story proves that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unexpected places, and that courage in any language sounds like love. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.